Hello everyone and welcome to Llinks Law Office's webinar series, How to Establish and Safeguard Your Operations in China, Part 3, China's Data Laws Explained. My name is Ariel Wang and I'm working as the Marketing Manager here at Llinks Law Offices. I'm excited to be hosting the session today. In today's webinar, our speaker, David Pan, will help to explore China's data classification laws and share case studies on foreign entities in China, and share how foreign investors can strike a good balance between data utilization and compliance. Our speaker, David Pan, is a partner of Llinks Law Offices Shanghai. The webinar comprises of 40 minutes of presentation and 20 minutes of Q&A session at the end. If you have a question for our speaker, please feel free to send it through the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom player. We'll be answering questions at the end of the session. If we don't get to your question during today's webinar, we will be sure to follow up afterwards. We'll also share webinar PPT and audio recording with you after the webinar. Now, without any further ado, I would like to kick things off by welcoming our speaker, David Pan. David, now over to you.
Thank you, Ariel, for your introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good morning. My topic today, I would just kick off punctually. I don't want those who are on time get punished by waiting those latecomers by a few minutes. I will just start punctually. My topic is data classification and management under Chinese law, under PRC law. So nowadays, nobody can ignore the importance of data. As people joke it, actually the iPhone, your smartphones know you better. Also yourself compared with yourself or your intimate partners, your spouses. And also, in a metaphor, data is oil in the digitalized market. Every company tries to grab as much more information, as much more data as possible. And from the point of view of the governments, each state, they always tries to seize their citizens' data within the territory, within their own border, for the purpose of keeping the so-called national sovereignty and also national security. So as you can see that data can be viewed from different angles, and that's the purpose. Our first part of our discussion today, data classification. So I'll just move on to the page 3, data classification. In short, everyone can easily divide so-called personal information and non-personal information, divide the data into two groups. By the way, I know there's some so-called debate on the terminology of information and data. But in our conversation, we just use it interchangeably. So for personal information, we will touch upon that part later. And for the non-personal information, I drew a kind of a pyramid to show the hierarchy of the importance of this non-personal information data. On the top, under Chinese law, the most important is so-called state secret. And then the next level is state intelligence. And then the next level is the important data. All these three types of data are related to national security from Chinese government perspective. And there's also other types of non-personal information. We call some of them so-called specially regulated data, which means there's some special regulation has been promulgated to govern those type of data. And on the bottom is so-called non-state secrets, non-state intelligence, non-important data, non-specially regulated data means there's no any specific law or regulation governing those type of non-personal information. So in terms of importance, you can easily see from this pyramids that state secrets and state intelligence are the so-called top non-personal information, important non-personal information. So, but this personal information and non-personal information actually can be converted two-way. For example, the personal information, if goes through the treatment of the so-called anonymization, de-identification, those personal information can be changed to non-personal information. And on the other way around, some non-personal information can be re-identified using the technology of de-anonymization. And then those non-personal information can be converted back to personal information, excuse me. So we now know that 2 points, 2 key messages. Under Chinese law, we can divide data into 2 groups: personal information, non-personal information. And these 2 groups can be converted 2 ways. Okay, let's talk about this top important non-personal information, state secrets and state intelligence. What is state secret? In China, there's a special law called State Secrets Law, which provides a definition: those information concerning national security interest. And state secrets can only be accessed by limited personnel within a certain period of time, as determined under relevant legal procedures. Oh, that's the definition of state secrets. I don't want to elaborate on the list of state secrets. And then there's another concept, state intelligence. There's no special law in this regard in terms of state intelligence, but only in the so-called criminal law, there's some judicial interpretation, which also said state intelligence are relating to national security and interest, and has not been made public and shall not be disclosed according to law. As you can see, that the definition of state secret and state intelligence are kind of vague. And what is state secret? And then I can give you an example, using an example to give you a more vivid explanation. You probably believe that state secrets and state intelligence are usually controlled or possessed by state governments, but and those business operators are very remote from the business operators medical companies, insurance companies, etc. But let's look at China defines the state secrets depending on the so-called consequence test, which basically means if any leakage or data breach happens to state secrets, what kind of consequences, adverse consequences will happen. So for example, if any leakage of state secrets will cause severe damage, that will lead to the information to be identified as highly confidential state secrets. If there's only damage caused, that will be classified as confidential information. And then I'll just give you an example. Some so-called output of information, output in medical device or pharmaceuticals, output information may possibly be identified as state secrets. You will probably feel surprised. For example, some unnatural abortion medicine, some pharmaceutical companies, produce this type of medicines. And the output and actual usage information in China may probably constitute state secrets. And the reason for that, years ago, China has so-called birth control law. And the usage and output of this unnatural abortion medicine can actually deduce the number of cases of unnatural abortion in China. That will give away some so-called confidential information of the law enforcement of the birth control law. And that will cause, consequently, that will cause some national reputation damage. So by this logic, this output information of unnatural abortion medicine can possibly constitute the so-called state secret. So just give you this example, you can understand that state secrets are not necessarily irrelevant to the business operators. In other words, business operators also need to be cautious of whether they are owning or access to whether they own or access to any state secrets. Okay, and then let's move on to the second important non-personal information, important data. This is sort of like unique legal term or like concept in China. Important data refers to data closely related to national security, economic development, and social and public interest. Yeah, I don't want to repeat some so-called very detailed legal terms, kind of complicated legal terms. I just give you some anecdotes of the legislation about Chinese law in this regard. This important data is included in China's cybersecurity law, in short, CSL. When the draft for the second deliberation of the CSL was promulgated in July of 2016, Article 35 said personal information of citizens and important business data. You can see on the slide, we underscored important business data collected and generated by operators of critical information infrastructure. This again is also kind of complicated legal term. You can just you can just understand a special company, a special network operator. In short, we call CIO in China, must be like store such data in China. So after this second deliberation draft was circulated, a lot of multinational companies and also Chamber of Commerce showed their very strong concern. They are concerned that their so-called trade secrets, their business data, must be stored locally, and that will give them increase the risk of their so-called trade secrets leakage. So for this, out of this concern, these multinational companies and Chamber of Commerce tries to appeal to China government, and in the end, I cannot remember exactly the number, around 46 international organizations, business organizations, filed a petition letter to China State Council and have short meeting with China Premier Li Keqiang. And what happened after the meeting, after all this a petition? 4 months later, the official CSL, the official law, was promulgated. And this Article 35 was changed to Article 37. And then it was changed to personal information and important data collected and or generated in China must be stored in China. You can easily spot the difference. The difference is the official version actually deletes the words business to change it to important data. So, by intuition, you can easily get a conclusion which scope is much broader, in important business data or important data. Obviously, the latter, important data. And there is some reason why China government is so persistent in enforcing the law on the localization of the important data. Constrained by our time, we only have 40 minutes. I will not make any explanation. If you are interested, we're happy to talk to offline separately. So again, this important data refers to data closely related to national security, economic development, and social public interest. So these important data are not judged by the data owner, by the business companies, by the business operators, but from the viewpoint of government. In the viewpoint of government, there are some data which are important. So these type of data constitute important data. So the key message here is the important data are not judged by each data owner, data controller, but by the government. Okay. So again, to address the multinational companies' concern, they are concerned because there is some data localization requirement on the important data, at least for CIOs, critical information infrastructure operator. So their concerns, there may be some so-called enhanced risk, increased risk of their trade secrets leakage or infringement in China. So in last year, in the May of last year, there's another regulation called Data Security Management Measures, exposure draft, to make some so-called exclusions on the scope of important data. They said the regulations provided that important data shall usually not include information related to production and operation and internal management of enterprises or personal information. In other words, according to this exposure draft, some SAP information, Salesforce information, and Workday HR information, etc. Those are internal data, are usually not classified as important data. Okay, so probably you may, okay, and then you say, oh, the definition of important data is so vague, I cannot have any clues which data can constitute important data. The next slide gives you some so-called guidance. In Chinese law, there's some guide on the identification of important data, which also takes the so-called consequence test. Basically means that if any information that is otherwise not important data still may constitute important data, if this data aggregated with others, combined with others, can deduce some important information. These standards are maybe too abstract to understand. I'll just give you an example. If any information, for example, the information itself are not important data, which means the information themselves, if leaked or accessed by or lost or abused by some terrorist forces, will not cause any serious consequences. But there's still so-called probability that this information can still constitute important data. I'll just give you an example. One of my clients is a European company, and this company is a top so-called one of the largest miner equipment producer. My client, manufactures those mining equipment that are widely used in China's iron ore, pepper, all these mining operators. And my client is trying to devise a very smart so-called 24-hour, 7-day services. Because this mining equipment, they use very precious drills, and these drills are very valuable. If these drills broken or cracked, the drilling machine must be the drilling machine will have to stop, and then there will be loss of productivity, loss of profit, and also the cost of replacement of the very precious drill heads. So my client tries to divide 24-hour and 7-day diagnostic services to those to their customers, which basically the mine operators. For example, because these like drilling machines are like running almost like 24 hours a whole day. In China's nighttime, my client, the drilling equipment producer cannot afford like still employee a task force like who work overnight to monitor the operation of the drilling heads. They but they placed many sensors, all kinds of sensors on the drilling machines, drilling heads, and these sensors can tell and can record moisture, temperature, a lot of like this like condition, a lot of like data relating to operation conditions of this drilling machine, and these data can automatically upload it to the cloud, for example AWS, for example, and then because it's China nighttime, it's US daytime. My clients, the manufacturer, their team in US can watch online the operation condition of these drilling machines. If there are any like signals that the drilling machine may probably like broken or cracked, the service team in the United States can give some heads up and warnings to their customers who can like check immediately, timely to avoid the loss. It's a perfect like business plan, but unfortunately, these data, which are basically the temperature, the moisture, the running time of the machines, are still possibly constitute important data. And the reason for that, again, these data themselves are not reveal any like if any like leakage to if this type of information leakage, there will be no serious consequences. But you can imagine by deducing this information, for example, the running time of the drilling machines, there's some other information can be deduced, can be generated. For example, the actual output of some like pepper for sorry, it's not pepper, it's like ores, all these like very precious metals in China. So and these resources, natural resources information, are very important from the viewpoint of Chinese government. So unfortunately, I use the word unfortunately, these so-called machine operation data will constitute important data. And for this reason, to export, transmit this data outside China, there's some security assessment requirements will be imposed. Okay, so, okay, in the last 20 minutes, we talked about non-personal information. Then we move on to personal information. Personal information, the definition, I believe, in particular to those like audience in Europe who are very familiar with GDPR, very famous GDPR, should be very familiar with the definition. China, under Chinese law, the definition is similar. Basically, it's personal identifiable information, PII, or personal identified information. However, the concept, the definition is not perfect. And the reason why I said, is imperfect is the definition can be very, very vague, can be very ambiguous. For example, under Chinese law, any information that can alone or in combination with other information can refer to or identify natural person or reflect activities of natural person. And those type of information can be identified, can be defined as personal information. There are some defects of this definition. For example, in combination with other information, so how many pieces of information needs to be combined? One piece, 10, 100? by combined with one single other piece of information can identify a person, or identify 10, or identify or combine with 10, or combine with 100 can refer or identify a person. So will this make any difference? Will this information still constitute personal information? And also this combination does not take into account any resources and ability of personal information controller. For ordinary, any of us, we don't have special technology know-how. We don't have any special equipment, a super running fast computer. So for us, it's really hard to using unidentified personal information to combine with other information to re-identify a person. But some very large scale data controller, they have very big data about human population, etc. They're easily to crack or decode any non-personal information to personal information. So again, running out of time, I using a diagram, a chart. So personal information, we can classify it into a different type of information, whether it's personal identifiable information, or whether it's personal identified information, or is personal reachable information, which means I don't know which the subject of this information first, but I can reach this person. So again, I don't want to repeat some legacy, very complicated legal term. So just to give you 2 examples, you can think about it. For example, in healthcare sector, if any patient was hospitalized during the time period of their hospitalization, their ward number, well, the room number, or their bed number, can identify this person during his time of hospitalization, right? But after hospitalization, this ward number and this bed number are irrelevant to this patient. So whether this type of information will constitute personal information protectable by Chinese law, you can think about it. And if you would like to discuss, we can discuss later. And just give you an example, nowadays, people use a lot of so-called smart living equipment like iRobots and smart kitchen and a smart refrigerator or smart cooker. So when this house owner left their homes, the iRobots start to vacuum, clean the room. And when this the house owners is about to get back, the cooker start to cook rice, etc. So this type of information, the machine information, are so-called machine automatically generated information. If I tell you this type of information still possibly constitute personal information under Chinese law, you probably will feel surprised. And the reason I can explain to you, remember, please bear in mind, under Chinese law, if any information that can reflect activities of a natural person, this type of information can still fall into the group, fall into the category of personal information. Those machine automatically generated information we mentioned actually reflected the house owner's life pattern every day, when to leave home, when get back home, etc. So, okay, the key message of this slide is Chinese laws sets forth a very broad scope of personal information. Okay, and then the next slide, I will talk about personal information. There is some technology called de-identification or pseudonymized information. I believe it may be too detailed, but I just give you an example. In your business organization, if your IT or data expert saying, talk to you, if you are legal counsel, compliance counsel, saying, don't worry, we have take sufficient measures to anonymize these data. So these data are not like personal data, they are anonymized data. Remember, legally, technically anonymized information does not equal to legally anonymized information, which basically means that there's some legal standards for the so-called qualified anonymization. For example, if your colleagues like IT or data science just using some pseudonymization method, for example, change the name of natural persons to a serial of number, but there's some kind of algorithm. Basically means that there's some mapping, there's a method of mapping the serial number and the real name. And these are not anonymized data. It's not qualified under Chinese law. So yeah, I don't want to repeat this because there's too many to cover. We'll need to go through. And basically, personal information we can further divide in two groups: sensitive information and non-sensitive information. GDPR also takes this similar approach, dividing sensitive information, non-sensitive information. I don't want to repeat the definition and the list of personal sensitive information under Chinese law, which basically like some information relating to persons' property, a wealth, house, biometric, privacy, identity, etc., can be viewed as sensitive information. And then other personal information will not be sensitive information. Similar to GDPR, if any if any company would like to collect sensitive information, the collector needs to get so-called explicit consent. So in other words, opt-out is not a legitimate way to collect this personal information. And also, I need to remind you, don't take it for granted. Some sensitive information under the GDPR may not necessarily in China's law. For example, sexual orientation, political belief, etc. Under the GDPR are sensitive information, which in China are not. And also in China, there are some special type of information which are very critically sensitive information, which may not necessarily classified as sensitive information under GDPR. For example, the whereabouts locations of people, etc. And also your personal smartphones, equipment, the serial number, machine number, etc. Okay. We have covered state secrets, state intelligence, important data, which are so-called very important data from the viewpoint of the Chinese government. And also we have covered the personal information. We need to talk about other data. If we can go back to the first page, the pyramid, we said there's some other data which are non-personal information, and there are some special regulation that govern this type of non-personal information. For example, I'll just give you one example. Population health or human genetic resources data, we usually call HGR, human genetic resources data. This data, without some security assessment, cannot move out from China freely. And the reason is similar, and the rationale for restricting this type of data moving outside of China is similar to important data, to the one of important data. Okay. So in addition to this special regulated data, and there's other type of data we call non-special regulated data. specially regulated non-personal information. But there's still like special laws to govern this type of data in China. For example, for those like industrial companies who operate in China, in China there is so-called industrial data classification and grading guidelines for industrial data, which basically requires each company, manufacturing company, for example, to classify their data into different groups, into different grades, depending on the importance of this type of data, and manage this industrial data by different grades, and conduct annual review on the security, on the safety of this type of data. Okay, we have talked about this like data classification under Chinese law. So in a conclusion, there's two types of data: personal information, non-personal information, and there are special regulations to govern the non-personal information and also personal information. So for those business organizations who operate in China, how to manage their data in a compliant manner? Because this like data law in China, I have to say, is quite a bit complicated. So okay, first, we always stress the importance of the full life cycle compliance of data management, which means usually people pay attention to the phase of collection. Like, I need to get a free informed consent from the data subject, FIC, a free informed consent. So people nowadays pay attention to the collection, the compliance at the phase of collection. But for the full cycle, if any business organization wants to achieve the compliance goal on data management, this organization needs to pay full attention to the full life cycle of data management, which basically runs from collection, data collection, data transmission, data storage, data usage, data sharing, and in the end, data destruction. So the next slide I share with you life cycle management of data. I constrained by time, I cannot talk each step, each phase in detail. I just give you an example. For example, at the stage of transmission, your business organization, which operates in China, needs to make sure the method of data transmission, whether it's encrypted or not encrypted. And this transmission, the data recipients will be your affiliates of your companies outside China or a dependent third party. Because different recipients requires the data exporter to take different approaches and security measures for the data transmission. Okay, so again, for this full life cycle data management, technical control and also policy control, or in other words, internal policy control, are equally important. Again, I don't want to spend much time on state secrets because I believe although you have the chance, you have the probability to get access to or even own some state secrets. I explained at the very beginning of our presentation. But I believe compared with other data, the chances are very low. So let's talk about the important data. Important data, in short, under Chinese law, the critical information infrastructure operator has the obligation to store the important data locally in China, and also personal information they collected or generated in China. if they plan to move the important data outside China, security assessment must be done. And to even to like worry to get these multinational companies more worried that China like promulgated some new laws regulation to expand these obligations to all network operators, which basically means that there are some chances that all multinational companies operating in China will bear the legal liability for security assessment for transmitting the important data outside China. And also, some specially regulated data, HGR, for example, human genetic resources. If any multinational pharmaceutical companies, European headquartered or US headquartered, which operates in China, they want to move out any information relating to Chinese citizens, human genetic information, HGR, if they would like to collect, preserve, or utilize or transmit outside China, a security assessment approval must be obtained. The Ariel reminded me I'm running out of time, but I still have 10 or 17 slides. I'll just keep it completed in 3 to 5 minutes. So this personal information, if any information data controller wants to achieve the full compliance goal in China, starting from collection and use, and also use storage and deletion, we have stressed the importance of full life cycle importance. For example, the principle of lawful, justifiable, and necessary must be met to collect the information. To just give you an example, for example, if any app in China, weather forecast app, would like to gather your location information, the user's location information, and the collection of location information meets the principle of lawful, justifiable, necessary, because this app is supposed to provide weather forecast services for you. So without telling the app operator your location, this app cannot provide services. In contrast, if the app said, the operator is very interested in your how much money you earned, your wage salary, your marital status, your education level, etc. And this collection of this type of information are not lawful, justifiable, and necessary for the operating of the app. So yeah, running out of time, I don't want to repeat each step, but I just give you some highlights. You maybe feel surprised. Under Chinese laws, there are some stricter legal requirements on personal information protection. For example, in terms of privacy policies, China law and regulations and also policies require every function. For example, take app as an example. Each function of app requires each separate privacy policy, which means you cannot just use one privacy policy to cover all your app's functions. Okay, data localization we have talked about, which basically means there's a possibility that all network operators in China will bear the legal liability. And security assessment, in short, there's two parts: personal information export outside of China. First part is legal. You need to make sure the data exporter and the data recipient entered into contract in accordance with Chinese law to ensure the data recipient will undertake to protect and take enough technical measures to protect the security of the data to be exported. And also the technical measures needs to be taken, like encrypted, etc., to make sure the safety, the safe data export. Yeah, I will just skip these slides. I will just skip to 25, page 25, because it's a very interesting topic. Who owns the personal information? Who is the owner of personal information? You may be laughing at this question. Definitely myself, right? I own my personal information. Actually, the answer is no, not necessarily. For example, almost every country has some restrictions on on personal information transmitting outside the country, including China, also US, etc. So if you have absolute ownership of your personal information, why the government still exercise some power authority to ban the export of your personal information? So if you fully own your personal information, for example, if you log on to Amazon, etc., all these like e-commerce websites, your transaction data and also your preference data, and these e-commerce operators they like grouped your personal information, make some personal filing, and sell this like information to others, earn profit. And then if you own 100% own this information, you are entitled to claim the profit of those e-commerce operator who sells your personal information to others, right? But in reality, you don't. So in short, it's still debatable who owns this personal information. So yeah, so whether it's like data controller or data subject, is still debatable. So in China's law, it's even like it's even more complicated, and it's very blurry. In short, now the current viewpoints through judicial cases is people will own the so-called personality rights. But if any data controller puts sweats, is a metaphor, to put sweats, put a lot of efforts to convert the personal information to some digital products, and then the and this like data controller will enjoy some proprietary rights, not own the personal information, but have some proprietary rights on these data products, etc. So okay, last 1 minute. We have walked through the data classification under Chinese law and some some legal requirements. So what's the impact? So first, each business organization needs to realize the consequences of data breach. Data breach on those state secrets, state intelligence, important data, specially regulated data, non-specially regulated personal information. I don't want to repeat it one by one, but please bear in mind, unlike in Europe, if any like data breach cases happen, for example, some large-scale hotel data breach, there will be large amount of civil litigation for damages. It will not happen in China, but in China there's very special phenomenon or consequence that the liable party, liable company will possibly get criminally liable. For example, someone in charge will go to prison and the company itself will be suspended business operation. That's a unique punishment, kind of unique punishment in China. And it's not theoretical risk, it's actual real risk. Okay. So as social credit system, China government is like building up a like uniform platform to collect the behavior pattern and also other behavior in each sector, like customs, tax, banking, etc. The rating each business object, each business organization in China. So why we mention this? Because each business organization which operates China must make sure that when you submit any data relating to your company, you need to make sure these data are consistent when you file to different like government departments. Otherwise, you will get the inconsistent data will give you some either low credit or punishment per se. Okay. Okay. Lastly, advices. Okay. You cannot like get full compliance in China. It can be very straightforward because the legal requirements are very strict and there's a lot of ambiguous legal requirements. But at least you need to understand what are all those potential risks and estimate the compliance cost and prioritize your your gap mitigations task, and then designated the data compliance organization. Similar to DPO concept in China, we have CISO role position, Chief Information Security Officer. So you must appoint a CISO in China, and then take some gap mitigation measures. And lastly, if you are a legal counsel and compliance counsel, you need to develop some basic IT knowledge. Otherwise, you cannot smoothly communicate with your colleagues in IT and data science. For example, data encryption, and also VPN, cloud storage knowledge, etc. I will just stop here as I'm running out of time. And if you have any question, I'm happy to talk about. Yeah. That's a very good question, and the answer is yes. Under Chinese law, there's two types of data transmission. Okay. Can you hear us? Yeah, that's a very good question. The answer is yes. Under Chinese law, there's two types of data transmission.
Sorry, I've got some feedback from the audience. Apparently, the questions, you guys didn't hear the question. Okay, let me repeat the question again. If we access the system from the UK to provide support, accessing screens would allow us to see data in the UK. This would be through a browser. Where does it sit in transmission movement? This is the question. And David, can you please answer?
Yes. And the answer is yes. Under Chinese law, there's two types of data transmission outside China. First is so-called actual transmission, for example, through any FTTP, email, etc. And the second type of so-called virtual transmission, for example, by providing data access to those viewers to outside of China. For example, in your case scenario, to allow someone working in UK and access to data in China. So that's still constitute data export, data transmission outside.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more questions. So how is China building its legal framework on data privacy?
Yeah, that's a broad and interesting question. China so far is building up its privacy law and personal information law. For example, we talk a lot about personal information and privacy, but so far China doesn't have any single personal information law. The law itself is still in draft as drafting stage. At present, just kind of umbrella of different like laws and regulations scattered, from criminal law, civil law, administrative law, to govern this personal information from different perspectives. And as I briefly mentioned in my presentation, China has very unique style of enforcing the law to stress the so-called criminal measures. So again, in short, China, there's no single law in the personal information area, but there's multiple laws and regulations scattered around. Yeah.
Question. How does a foreign investor create and implement a data privacy framework?
And the answer is you can. The answer is easy, and it's really difficult to customize codified privacy policy in China. The reason I was saying it's easy because China has national standard, GB, in short, China national standard on the privacy policy. There's kind of standard templates. But the reason I'm saying on the other side is difficult is because, as I mentioned, Chinese law is very strict on the privacy notice. Each function or each business unit needs to have a separate like privacy notice. So to make sure the privacy policy fits your business, fits your function, fits your business unit, you have to find out what exactly business activities this business unit has been engaging in China, and what kind of personal information this business unit is collecting, using, etc. And only after having done this type of due diligence, your business organization can prepare so-called perfect or like lawful privacy notice under Chinese law.
Thanks, and thanks, David, for answering those questions. We don't have much time left, so if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact our speaker, David, directly. As you can see, he's got his WeChat scan code up on the screen. Okay, thank you all for joining us for the webinar. I also would like to draw attention to our upcoming webinar, which is the last session of our webinar series, Safeguard Your Intellectual Property in China, which will take place on the 21st of April. You can sign up for the above webinar on our website, www.linkslaw.com or CBBC website. Thanks again for your participation, and we hope to see you again at our next webinar. Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Thank you.